And we're back. Disorder in the court is back in session. Can we hear it from the master gaveler?
Alfred!
We are back. I feel like that would happen to me if I tried to operate a gavel. If I tried to operate a gavel, that same very thing would happen to me. All right, so we are now in the afternoon session of day 6 of the Adam Montgomery trial. We will be continuing with state's witnesses. There's a lot of witnesses on their list. You know, they usually, in my belief, they do the more technical testimony that requires people to be more alert in the morning, because people generally are more alert in the morning than they are after lunch. That's just kind of a known thing across the corporate world. It's as an event planner, I've planned countless events, and when you're planning a program, you know, whenever you're trying to make sure people are paying attention, you schedule those things for the morning. And then, you know, when you're trying to just lull people into you know, hearing a narrative or hearing just question and answer, you schedule that for after lunch. So, you know, sometimes you can't get around that scheduling. Sometimes you're forced to, you know, schedule the boring technical stuff after lunch, and you see the result of it. You see the result of it in the aftermath. I hope you all had a lovely Valentine's Day break from this trial. I did see the clip that you sent me, Cutie Pie. I've seen that before. It's the old lady and the judge. It's really funny, but that particular clip, I'll pull a cleaner version of it. That particular one had a lot of noise that was kind of hard to hear the what the old lady says. And it's so funny that I just want to make sure that whatever I upload, you can really hear it. I've started to put together the list of witnesses that we know have testified already, but it's not complete yet. And probably either while we're doing this today or tomorrow, I'll be able to update you all on knowing who has testified and who hasn't. At least by tomorrow, when we start court up again tomorrow, we will know. One little, you know, sort of ironical Valentine's Day present for those of you who pay attention to the Lana Oriani legal battle saga is that she is due in court tomorrow for a pretrial motion for her criminal charges. And for those of you who are not aware, her criminal charges are telecommunications harassment and revenge prawn. She does have a lawyer for this. Unbelievably. I mean, at least she realized that she shouldn't try to represent herself. At least she realized she shouldn't try to represent herself when she's facing criminal charges. Leo, when you say again, I'm not sure what you mean by again. Do you mean again? I'm sure they will be asked. There's no jury yet. It is, if it goes to trial, it will probably be a jury trial. It's question. I believe it is a court-appointed lawyer, Harlot. I'm not totally sure. Sidebar, yes, sidebar Oriani. So we can at least we can at least imagine what it's like for her in court.
Because she couldn't file on me.
I am going to advise you, Miss Oriani.
That's fine.
You do have the right not to incriminate yourself.
I do.
I don't know.
And I would not like to speak on anything that has to do with that.
Please talk.
Yep.
Thank you. Are you going to let me talk now? Are you going to interrupt me?
You can speak. Absolutely.
I appreciate that. Thanks for your permission.
This is your courtroom.
Well, did you, Leo, did you see the short that I put up? Where she's at a bar with her boo thing and they're talking to the bartender and they're in downtown Columbus. And she says, I sue everyone, so I'm downtown all the time. As if that's a flex, right? And then she goes, joke's on me. Yeah, I posted a short on this channel. Since court hasn't come back yet, here, I can grab it. It's very short. It's very, very short. Real quick. Let me just make sure I do have play on. Yes, I do. Okay, hold on a moment. All right, be looking at the screen because here it comes.
You were not tagged in anything I do Idaho. I can promise you that because I am Idaho 4.
Wrong short. Wrong.
I can promise you that you're not tagged in anything I do Idaho 4.
This is the I am Idaho 4.
That's why I have 44,000 and you have 9.
Jamie Fells.
You were not.
Wrong short. This is the short I was talking about.
Fells.
You were not tagged in anything I do
Oh,
Idaho.
come
I can
on.
promise you that because I am Idaho 4.
Come
I can
on,
promise you that
Lynn.
you're not tagged.
Lynn. And no, they're not back in the courtroom yet. Here it is. I'm going to hit. I know I'm hitting the right short, but it keeps coming up with the wrong. There we go.
I'm downtown all the time. I sue everyone, so I go to the courthouse. I'm just kidding.
She's like, you might be right about that.
Yeah.
Should I take you serious?
Joke's on me. I'm downtown all the time. I sue everyone, so I go to the courthouse. I'm just kidding.
She's like, you might be right about that.
Yeah.
Should I take you serious?
Joke's on me.
So yeah, that did happen just last week or something. Last week or the week before, something like that. Something like that. So the clip I showed earlier, where, where she gets into where the judge has to finally tell her to be quiet. It's because Lana started to talk about the specific case that she's going into court for tomorrow. And, at first she's like, she was trying to, she being her opponent in that courtroom right there, she was accusing that opponent of not being able to file charges against her, so getting somebody else to file charges on her. But when you she actually has admitted to doing what she is charged of doing. The only way it's being challenged, the only reason there's a question as to whether she'll be convicted is because of the jurisdiction. She is challenging it on the jurisdiction. They did say they were going to be back at, maybe I missed, I thought I heard them saying they were going to be back at 1, but maybe I'm wrong. But we can sit here and hang out for a little bit waiting for them. So anyway, that shouting. Oh, 1:15. Okay, well, we have a few minutes. I guess I missed that part. Thanks, Scara. That's a good Halloween name, Scara. What are you for Halloween? Scara. Just kidding. Anyway, yeah, and so when Lana and the judge got into that little shouting match, when Lana was finally giving the judge permission to speak in her own courtroom after interrupting her countless times, the judge was trying to tell her, hey, look, you have a Fifth Amendment right not to incriminate yourself, by talking about that criminal case. And, Lana's like, oh, yeah. And, look, it would be one thing if this was a person who admitted that she has no courtroom experience, doesn't know her way out of a evidence bag, doesn't, it would be that would be one thing. But Lana is somebody who basically sits there and tells her audience with fine detail how the court operates, what you're supposed to do in court, what court strategy is, what court language is. She picks apart legal documents. She and when she's challenged in the chat, she gets angry. They delete comments that challenge what she's saying. So if someone were to say, this is something that's very typical of her, she'll say that is a tortious offense. And she means tortious, right? Tortious. But she doesn't know how to pronounce it. So someone in the chat will say, hey, it's not pronounced that way. It's pronounced tortious. That comment will get deleted. She won't admit it. She's in court tomorrow for 2 misdemeanor criminal charges. The criminal charges are telecommunications harassment and revenge P. So, and as I mentioned earlier, she has fully admitted to actually sending this person's image to another person, to a group chat. Yes, as a defendant. She is a criminal defendant in a misdemeanor. The state of Ohio is suing her, Destined. She is being charged by the state of Ohio with telecommunications harassment and revenge P. So the quote unquote victim in the case is another YouTuber named, his channel is called Father Snuggles. And I don't claim to know whether she will be convicted or not. It's a misdemeanor. She has no prior charges. She's challenging it on jurisdiction. I believe she's saying that she didn't send it from where she's being charged. And it possibly could work. I think what a lot of people don't realize is that a lot of people, most cases do not go to court. Most cases are terminated at an earlier stage. And by the way, they just don't have the volume on in the court yet. No, she is not defending herself. She has a lawyer for this. I believe it's court appointed, but I'm not totally sure. She made a community post about MJ a couple months before their hearing, and when one of her subs, yeah. So she didn't just do that. The day before the hearing, their first hearing, she did a 5-hour live stream. Okay. A 5-hour live stream titled Idaho 4 that was all about Melissa Jade, and it was disgusting. And it's still there. I linked to it in the short that in one of the shorts that I put up. So anyway, we are here for harmony. No, it won't be the same judge, Caroline. That judge was for.
And when you're ready, if you could just start by
Completely different
stating
judge.
and spelling your full name for the record.
My name is Rachel Radwich. First is Rachel, last Radwich.
Ms. Radwich, how are you presently employed? What do you do for a living?
I work for the Manchester Police Department in the Evidence Division.
And how long have you worked with the Manchester Police Department?
It'll be 9 years this September.
In those 9 years, have you held more than one position with the Manchester Police Department?
I have. So I started off as a emergency communications dispatcher. And then after about 2 or 3 years, I began working in evidence as an evidence specialist. And then as of last July, I was promoted to the evidence supervisor.
And what are your current duties and responsibilities as an evidence supervisor?
So I primarily oversee the 3 evidence specialists that also work in my unit. I oversee the intake and collection of all evidence that comes into the evidence division, as well as maintain control of all of our storage rooms. Ensure that all policies and procedures are being followed, and just keeping up with day-to-day tasks, completing requests, that sort of thing.
You mentioned the intake of all evidence. And can you just walk the jurors through that process, how things are taken in by the Manchester Police Department?
So generally speaking, either a patrol officer or a detective from the investigative division is the one collecting items from the scene or whatever they're working. All of our lockers or storage units for temporary storage have a one-way locking mechanism. So essentially the officer puts the item in. Once they lock it and secure it, only someone from evidence can access that item. From there, we maintain that the packaging used was the proper packaging to maintain integrity of that item. And then we decide on proper storage for long-term purposes for that, update the computer, make sure everything kind of checks out, and then put it away until it's needed for further analysis.
Ms. Radwich, you just mentioned that the detectives will collect things. Are you in a position where you go out and collect items?
So on large-scale scenes, my unit will be asked to assist, to include myself.
And you've mentioned evidence rooms, lockers, and storage units. Can you just describe those for the jurors so they're familiar? Are those all at the Manchester Police Department here in town?
Yes, so primarily most of our rooms are at Manchester Police Department. We have about 12 rooms on the second floor, all under the control of the evidence unit. It's limited access in, and then only the 4 of us in evidence can actually get into those rooms. We also have some outside storage areas for things that can't be brought in, so like explosives, bicycles. And then we have a room that's for ventilation. We call it our vented storage, so anything that isn't a drug item, which requires double security within the building, but still needs some sort of airflow due to the smell. That'll get stored in our vented storage. That way you're not bringing in something that stinks into the building to then permeate my office.
So, Ms. Radwich, I want to back up for just a second. To be an evidence supervisor, does that require any specific training or education?
So it requires experience in the evidence unit. I hold my Bachelor of Science degree in forensic science, as well as a Master's of Science degree in criminal justice. I've had training and certification through the International Association of Property and Evidence. And then there's also just on-the-job training that you get exposed to just through years of working in that division.
And do you do continuing, or have you done continuing training during your 9 years with the Manchester Police Department?
So I mostly stay up to date with case law, so local, state, and federal laws, make sure we're adhering to that. Stay up to date with our CALIA standards, which is accreditation for the police department, make policy changes as necessary to reflect that. And then I keep up with, technological advances. We work closely with the New Hampshire State Forensic Lab as far as different analysis that they're doing, keeping up with that Association for Property and Evidence, as well as we work closely with the FBI and the ATF, and kind of always maintaining constant communication of where we need to be at to secure and maintain evidence.
Now, Ms. Radwich, I'd like to switch gears, and I want to talk about the case of a missing child, Harmony Montgomery. What was your role, just generally, your role and involvement on the case of the missing child, Harmony Montgomery?
So for this case, I was still an evidence specialist, so I hadn't been yet promoted. And I had a few different roles within this, but primarily it was to assist the detective division for those large-scale scenes, just to help maintain and document any evidence that's being brought in, ensure the integrity and packaging of those items.
Do you recall when your involvement on this matter began?
I want to say it was January 2022, and at that point, it would have just been primarily the intaking and storing of items coming in. At that point, it wasn't a full-scale investigation to what it ended up being. So just, different interview discs, paperwork, that sort of thing we were collecting through those one-way lockers and putting them into storage.
And you mentioned earlier that you're in charge of intake of all evidence that's brought into the Manchester Police Department. Are you aware of whether or not evidence has been brought to the Manchester Police Department regarding this case?
Yes, there has been a lot of evidence.
When you say a lot, what does that mean?
About 900 pieces, give or take.
Ms. Radwich, during your involvement in this case, did you ship items from the Manchester Police Department to DNA Labs International?
Yes, so we would take items being stored at Manchester Police Evidence Office, and I would transport it to a FedEx facility. Generally, we go to the one in Bedford, and do standard express overnight delivery of those items directly to DNA Labs International in Florida.
And I want to discuss specifically an evidence item bearing the evidence item number MER 3D-RL1 through RL18. Are you familiar with those items?
Vaguely. I know MER 3D is the ceiling tile, and then anything with the RL attached would be any of the rails or screws that were removed from that ceiling tile.
And can you just describe for the jury how you became familiar with the ceiling portion, the rails that you just mentioned?
Okay, so MER 3D is a large piece of drywalled ceiling tile. There's a vent opening with metal rails. I first became familiar with it when, of course, it came into my office and we needed to store it. I was also part of transporting that item to and from the lab being the state forensic lab. Once that came back to my office, after testing was done at the state level, I was then overseeing that piece of evidence being reopened essentially, so that the analysts could get smaller cuttings for a deeper analysis, only because transporting that ceiling tile was just becoming too much. It's very large, required 2 people. So it was decided that cuttings would be taken for further processing instead of transferring this massive piece back and forth.
And let me stop you there. You said that the analyst made the cuttings.
Yes.
Were you there when the analyst made the cuttings?
Yes.
And what was that analyst's name?
Kevin McMahon.
And that's an individual from the lab
Yes.
here in New Hampshire. Do you know whether he made specific markings on the areas that he cut?
There were markings made next to the squares that were cut out.
Following that interaction, did you have occasion to see that item again in your facility here at the Manchester Police Department?
Yes, so shortly after that time frame, that was mid to late June. And then about a month or so later, we again had to pull the ceiling tile out, and we brought it to our second floor training room, essentially to remove the metal rails from the piece of drywall. The reasoning for this is, again, it was really big, really bulky, and we wanted to see what was under those rails. So I was amongst a team of detectives. We took the ceiling tile that was stored securely in the evidence division. We wheeled it down in its packaging to the training room, which was right down the hall from my office. And then once there, we did what we needed to do to get those rails removed.
Do you recall with any specificity the detectives that you mentioned?
It was Sergeant Lovejoy, Detective Lammy, Detective Bombard, and Detective Rayhill.
That's Max Rayhill.
Yes.
And so did you unpackage the item that day? You mentioned it was in July. Do you recall the specific day?
I want to say it was the 18th.
Okay. So on July 18th, did you unpackage the item for the detectives?
Yes. So once we got it to the training room, we put down a clean piece of craft paper, put this item on top of it, and then just carefully open it up so as to not disturb the contents underneath. Of course, we had to use a knife to cut into it because it was wrapped in cardboard, given that it was drywall, so we didn't want it to bend and then break.
Did you have any impressions when the rails came off that item of MER 3D?
Yeah, so first looking at the ceiling tile, you could see some like dark staining on the drywall backing. And then as the rails were being removed, you could see dark red, like crusted staining along the rails as well as slightly underneath. And as the rails were being removed by the detectives, I could smell just a foul odor coming from that piece of drywall as the rail was being lifted.
And were you familiar with that foul odor that you smelled?
Yes.
And can you explain that to the jurors? How are you familiar with it, with the smell?
So the smell, I would call it like a pungent rotting smell. And I'm familiar with that, and I would associate that with decomposition. I know what that smell is like. I've worked on numerous crime scenes in which there was a body present. I've attended an autopsy, and I've also regularly handled evidence that comes in from death scenes.
At the Manchester Police Department, do you have a specific location for such items with body fluids decomposition?
So yes, that would be the ventilated storage, but given the importance of this piece of evidence and the amount of packaging that was wrapped around it, again, there was layers of cardboard. It was really maintained and sturdy. We kept that in our upstairs evidence room. That way it would be better preserved and the integrity would maintain through different weather changes, that sort of thing.
If I can have a moment. Thank you. No further questions.
No questions.
You may sit down.
Okay, thank you.
Sometimes we have to take witnesses not necessarily in the order that we would like. We'd like to call a particular witness, Mr. Yared Mondrak, to the stand, please, to take advantage of the translation services that are available to us today.
All right. The witness is coming, and then I'll ask the interpreter to please step up as well.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Yes, thank you. That would be great.
And, sir,
And the interpreter has been placed under oath
A la intérprete se,
interpret to the best of her skill, knowledge, and ability.
a la intérprete se le ha puesto bajo juramento para que interprete a lo mejor de sus habilidades.
good afternoon, Mr. Mondrag.
Buenas tardes, señor Mondrag.
If you could please stand up for a moment,
Sí, por
please.
favor, se podría poner de pie.
And if you would please raise your right
Si puede
hand.
alzar la mano derecha.
Do you solemnly swear
Usted jura solemnemente
testimony you give this jury
que el testimonio que usted va a dar ante este jurado
will be the truth,
va a ser la
the
verdad,
whole truth,
la verdad completa
and nothing but the
y
truth?
solo la verdad,
So help you God.
bajo la ayuda de Dios?
Sí.
Yes.
Thank you, sir. Please feel free to have a seat.
Puede tomar asiento.
Mr. Mondrag, as we're being recorded here today,
Señor Mondrag, ahora nos están grabando,
will you please state your name and spell both your first and your last name?
por favor, nos podría decir su nombre y también deletrear su primer nombre y su apellido.
Jared Brian Lujano Mondragón.
Jared Brian Lungano Mondragón.
Y-A-R-D.
Y-A-R-D.
And your last name, sir. Would
Y
you
su
spell your last name,
apellido?
please?
L-U-J-A-N-O.
Lugano, L-U-J-A-N-O.
And is that your full name, sir?
¿Y eso es su nombre completo, señor? Yes.
Sir, what town do you live in?
Señor, ¿en qué pueblo vive usted?
En Manchester.
En Manchester.
And how long have you lived in
¿Y
Manchester?
cuánto tiempo ha vivido usted en Manchester?
23 años.
23 years.
23 years. Okay.
23 años, ¿ok?
What do you do for work, sir?
¿En qué trabaja usted?
Drywall y metal frame.
En drywall and metal frame.
How long have you done that kind of work?
¿En cuánto tiempo ha hecho usted ese tipo de trabajo?
15 años.
About 15 years.
15 years. If I could approach the witness, please, Your Honor.
Si me puedo acercar al testigo, por favor.
So he's a local drywaller.
To show you what's marked States Exhibit 30.
Señor Lugano Mondrag, estoy aquí para mostrarle lo que se llama la prueba número 30.
Do you recognize this building?
¿Usted reconoce este edificio?
Sí.
Yes.
Have you ever done work at this building?
¿Usted alguna vez ha trabajado en este edificio? Yes.
What kind of work did you do there?
¿Qué tipo de trabajo hizo usted allí?
Sheetrocking frame.
Sheetrocking, framing.
Do you know or have you ever met someone by the name of Adam Montgomery?
¿Usted conoce o alguna vez ha conocido una persona con el nombre de Adam Montgomery?
No.
No.
And do you know or have you met with anyone by the name of Kayla Montgomery?
¿Y usted conoce o ha conocido a alguna persona con el nombre de Kayla Montgomery?
No.
No.
And that location where you did work installing sheetrock,
¿Y ese lugar donde usted hizo trabajo instalando el sheetrock?
did you ever live at that address?
¿Usted alguna vez vivió en esa dirección? No.
And other than doing the work for the sheetrock, have you ever been back to that address?
Fuera de hacer ese trabajo con el sheetrock, ¿ahí usted ha regresado a esa dirección?
No.
No.
Thank you, sir. I don't have any other questions for you. Defense counsel may
Gracias.
have
No
a few.
tengo otras preguntas para usted, la defensa.
And I have no question.
Y yo no tengo preguntas, su señoría.
Your Honor, we'd ask the witness to please be excused then.
A su señoría pediríamos que excusen al testigo.
You are excused, sir.
Usted está excusado. Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Gracias, señor.
That was very quick.
Yes, thank you.
And Your Honor, at this time, the state calls
criminalist Kevin McMahon to the stand.
I'm a little lost on what they were. Yeah, no cross whatsoever, Evil Queen. I'm a little lost on what they were trying to accomplish there. Maybe I'm sure they'll be putting it together in the closing, but
Just be careful of the wires, please, sir.
And Mr. McMahon, if you would please remain standing for a moment and please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you give this jury will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you, sir. Please feel free to have a seat.
Good afternoon, Your Honor.
Yeah.
Good afternoon.
And Mr. McMahon, there's some water up there for you if you need it, or if you need a break at any time, please let us know, okay?
Thank you.
Would you please, because we're being recorded here today, state your full name, spelling both your first and your last name for the record?
My name is Kevin, Kevin, middle initial G, and my last name is McMahon, capital MC, capital MAHON.
And Mr. McMahon, up until last year, where did you work?
I was formerly employed by the New Hampshire State Police Forensic Laboratory in Concord, New Hampshire,
How long did you work for them?
for over 40 years.
And it's my understanding that you retired last year from there.
Yes, I did.
What was your position while you were working at the lab?
I was assigned to the Forensic Biology Unit,
And was there an official title that you had?
Criminalist 2.
Okay. And what does that mean to be a criminalist 2 at the New Hampshire State Police Forensic Lab?
Well, a criminalist 1 is an entry-level position. Criminalist 2 would be more of a journeyman level position, where you have more responsibilities or more duties assigned to you than a criminalist 1 would.
I understand that you said that you were there for 40 years. What were the different units of the lab that you worked in during those 40 years?
I worked primarily in the forensic biology unit, although way back when it was just forensic serology. I was actually hired as a drug chemist, but then was transferred into the serology section. But over the years, I took on additional responsibilities, most of those dealing with the analysis of items of what are known as trace evidence, which would include the examination of hairs and fibers, the examination of paints and plastics, and the examination of automobile lamps, specifically the filaments in a lamp, for purposes of determining whether a taillight or a headlight was on or off at the time of a collision.
And Mr. McMahon, let me ask you, can you go through a little bit of what your educational background was, specifically in the area of dealing with serology and the identification of bodily fluids?
Well, I hold both Bachelor of Science and Master of Science degrees in forensic science from the University of New Haven in West Haven, Connecticut. And both those programs were overseen by fairly well-known forensic biochemists at the time. And so it would be difficult for someone to go through that program without having a lot of experience and exposure to forensic serology. And so in addition to what I learned about forensic serology while undergoing my education, I underwent extensive on-the-job training soon after transferring to the serology section of the lab back in 1983.
And could you please explain what forensic serology is? What is that the science of?
So forensic serology is that area of expertise within the field of the forensic sciences that deals specifically with the identification and the characterization of blood and other body fluids as they are associated with physical evidence. And it's the screening process which in modern times immediately precedes DNA testing.
In addition to your educational background, have you received any specialized training after you obtain your degrees within that field of serology?
Well, over the years, I've had a number of opportunities to attend various schools and workshops and symposia dealing with various aspects of forensic science, some of those specifically dealing with forensic serology.
Are you a member of any professional organizations when it comes to serology or to detection?
Well, I'm a member in good standing of the Northeastern Association of Forensic Scientists.
And over your career, how many serological analysis or serology analysis would you estimate that you've made?
Serological analyses, I would estimate in the thousands or tens of thousands.
Have you ever been qualified in court as an expert witness in the subject of serology?
I have many times.
And were those in New Hampshire courts?
Yes.
And does that include this particular jurisdiction where we are today, Hillsborough County, Northern District?
It does.
Your Honor, at this time, I'd ask the court to please qualify Mr. McMahon as an expert in the field of forensic serology.
Any objection? I have no objection to him giving his opinion. The court finds that he is qualified as an expert.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. McMahon, what was your involvement into the investigation into the death of Harmony Montgomery?
I was assigned as the point person, at least as far as any requests that were made by the Manchester Police Department for testing or examination of evidence for biological materials, primarily in this case, blood or hairs.
I want to talk to you a little bit about some of the evidence that you did do serology testing or at least examinations on in this case. It's my understanding that several of the items that you examined had no stain, that you saw nothing to be tested. Is that correct?
That's correct. There were a number of items that I examined and did not find any stains or deposits that I felt were characteristic of blood. And so no further testing was done beyond a mere physical examination.
And then were there other items that you looked at that you did test, but it turned out that they were negative for blood?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Were there also an item or two that you tested that was positive for blood?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So I'd like to start then, understanding that those are three categories of things that you found. I want to start with some of the evidence that you tested that did not have blood on them, things that were examined and tested, but then did not have blood. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
Okay. What pieces of evidence did you test that you found out that they did not have blood on them? And I'd like to start specifically with items that you tested on January 5th of 2022, excuse me, that you wrote in a report on January 5th of 2022. And would you like me to refer to the item names, or excuse me, the numbers that have been assigned to those items? Or do you have a copy of your reports available in case you need to refresh your recollection?
I have a copy of my entire case report. So you can either refer to the date of the report or the exhibit numbers so that I can verify what you're asking me.
And let me ask you, did you sit through a deposition, Mr. McMahon, on the same case?
I did.
And that the same file that you have with you today, is that the one that you had at deposition when you were able to answer Attorney Smith's questions on that day?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Any objection, Attorney Smith, to having him refer to his notes?
No.
Okay. So, Mr. McMahon, let me ask you specifically about a test that you did on an item listed as JMT8. JMT8. And first of all, what was the description that you had for that item?
It was a section of automobile carpeting, not from the passenger compartment, but from the trunk of an automobile.
And let me ask, we're talking about JMT8. Did you ever meet a detective by the name of Joseph Tucker from the Manchester Police Department?
I'm sorry, what did you ask me?
Did you ever meet a detective by the name of Joseph Tucker from the Manchester Police Department?
I did not.
Okay. The testing on JMT8, what were the serological tests that you performed on that, and what was the results?
Well, I performed a physical examination of this piece of carpeting by putting some white paper, some bench paper down on my examination bench and then taking this section of carpeting out of its original container, laying it out on the bench, and examining it under the normal room lights. And maybe with the assistance of a flashlight, I did not see any staining on there that I thought was suggestive of blood. But knowing that dark colored substrates like this carpeting, which was black, I then employed the use of an infrared light source. It's basically another source of light, but rather than white light that we use for room lighting, it employs infrared light, and the image of what the camera is seeing is projected on a computer tablet. And during the course of this particular examination, I happened to notice a dark colored stain that was not visible under normal room lighting. And I tested that for the presence of blood, and that test was negative.
Did you also test another item with the same initials, JMT5, a T-shirt?
I did.
Okay. And similarly, what were the results on the test of the T-shirt?
In that case, I performed an analysis of a number of stains that were on that T-shirt, and I employed a test that would detect the presence of blood, and each of those tests were negative.
And finally, at one point, did you also, I'm referring to a report that you wrote on June 15th of 2022, or 13th was a correction on the 15th. Did you ever do an examination of a piece of evidence entitled JD47, an igloo cooler?
I did.
Okay. And what testing did you perform on that piece of evidence?
Again, the testing always begins with a physical examination for deposits which you believe are reflective of or suggestive of blood. There were a number of stains on this particular cooler that seemed to resemble dry blood stains. Each of those was tested chemically in the laboratory by myself, and each of those tests were negative for blood.
With regards to that cooler, could you generally describe what it looked like?
It's a large red igloo portable cooler. It has wheels on it, so it can easily be transported if it's full of ice or other things. And it has a red body. It has a white lid on it and a white liner. And I believe it has like a retractable black metal handle on it, like a wheeled suitcase would.
Yes.
Mr. McMahon, I'm going to put down in front of you, State's Exhibit 73. I'm going to lift the lid for a moment and just ask you whether or not you recognize the item that is inside.
Yes, I do.
What do you recognize that item to be?
That is Exhibit JD47, the igloo cooler.
So this is the one that you tested.
Yes, sir.
And could you please just tell us generally, where did you test this item?
If I might refer to my notes.
Yes, please.
So I tested a number of stained areas, 7 different areas.
I'm sorry, did you say 7 different areas?
7 different areas.
Okay.
One stain on the bottom of the base, another stain on the right side of the base of the white top edge, another stain on the red plastic base at the right front corner, another stain at the left side of the base near the white top edge. Let's see, the 5th stain was on the left side of the lid on the edge. 6th was on the right front of the lid at the edge, and the 7th stain was on the right side of the lid at the edge. I drew a diagram to assist me in detecting where on the lid I actually.
And with regards to each one of those tests, were all of those in fact negative for the presence of blood?
Yes, sir.
Objection leading.
What was your conclusion with regards to the test on those 7 areas?
Each of the results of each of the tests that I performed on those 7 areas were negative for the presence of blood.
Thank you. In this case, did Manchester Police Department ever inform you that some of the items that had been treated, for example, let's say JMT8, the stain in the trunk, did they ever tell you that some of these had been treated with a product by the name of Blue Star?
Yes.
And let me ask, does Blue Star interfere with the serological testing that you do?
In and of itself, it does not.
Okay. Does it interfere with the DNA testing of these samples?
It reportedly does not.
What's the testing method that you use when you're testing for the presence of blood?
Well, in the laboratory, I would use a test that's known as the Castle-Mayer test, Kastle-Meyer, Castle-Mayer.
What advantage, if any, does the Castle-Mayer test have over a test like Blue Star?
Well, the benefit of the Castle-Mayer test over a test like Blue Star or some other tests similar to it is that the Castle-Mayer test enjoys a reputation of being both very sensitive and fairly specific. None of these blood detection tests are 100% specific, which means that occasionally they will provide you with a positive result, but it's actually a false positive result. The result that you're getting that you would ordinarily think is positive is in fact a false positive, and it's due to something in the sample that you're testing that you're unaware of.
So with regards to the Castle-Mayer test, is that the test that the New Hampshire State Police Forensic Laboratory uses?
It is.
How long have you been using that test? How familiar are you with that test?
I've been using the Castle-Mayer test since college, and on day one in my introduction into forensic serology testing at the state police lab back in 1983.
Does the New Hampshire State Police Forensic Lab use Blue Star?
We do not.
Why not?
We prefer to use a different chemical for trying to find traces of blood at crime scenes. We use a chemical that's known as luminol.
And with regards to the concept of false positives, could you explain what false positives are when it comes to serology testing?
Well, in testing for the presence of blood, the tests that are available to us to detect the presence of blood all rely upon detecting the presence of hemoglobin. In order for a screening test or a detection test to be of any value, it must test for something that's unique in whatever you're looking for. And the one thing that's unique about blood compared to other body fluids is blood has hemoglobin in it, where saliva and semen and other body fluids do not. So all of the blood detection tests rely upon detecting the presence of hemoglobin. And in the Castle-Mayer test, we add a drop of a reagent that's made up of a chemical called phenolphthalein, and we look for a color change at that point. If in fact any of the known or well-recognized false positives are present in your sample, very often you'll see a reaction immediately after adding the phenolphthalein where you shouldn't. It's only after adding the second reagent, hydrogen peroxide, should you see a color change. And in the Castle-Mayer test, we're looking for the formation of a pink color. So if in fact I'm testing something for the presence of blood and I get that pink color after merely adding the testing reagent, the phenolphthalein, If I get a pink color there, that's a warning to me that the test isn't over yet. It's only halfway through, yet you're getting this pink color. And that would be considered a false positive reaction. It doesn't happen very often, but when it does, you're quite taken back because you're not expecting to see that color so soon. It's only after adding the hydrogen peroxide that you should see the color form, if in fact blood is present. If no color forms, then you can safely conclude that blood is not present.
The hemoglobin that you're trying to detect, what does the first part of that heme, what does heme stand for?
Well, the hemoglobin molecule is fairly large and complex, and a major portion of it contains an iron atom. And that's the heme portion of the hemoglobin molecule, the part that contains the iron.
The part that contains the iron.
That's correct.
Okay. I'd like to now move on to some of the other evidence that you tested, understanding that. Did you test a section of drywall and a T-beam framing in this case that you referred to in your June 13th and then 15 report of 2022?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Specifically, did you test a piece that was entitled MER 3D1, a piece of T-bar framing?
Yes.
Did you also test a piece called MER 3D-3B-1, a swab?
Yes.
Okay. And also, did you test any sort of cutting from a backing of a piece of drywall?
Yes, I did.
Could you please explain to the jury how you came to examine this exhibit, made that cutting, and then made those tests or conducted those tests?
This large item of evidence was submitted to the laboratory and was opened up by my colleague, criminalist Martin Orlowitz. He was preparing to process this item of evidence for latent fingerprints. But knowing that there was another request for looking for bloodstains, I was called over to conduct that examination prior to his analyses. And after I had examined that item of evidence, I had found several areas that I had suspected that were possibly blood. And so I went about testing several of those areas for the presence of blood using the Castle-Mayer test. And each of the areas that I tested positive for blood.
Before you did that testing, you described before how you would do a physical examination of an item. Did you do that before you decided what areas to test?
Oh, yes.
Okay. And at any point, did you label anything on that piece of drywall, on that backing?
I did. So that it would be clear, if need be down the road, like today, to know exactly where I tested or I took my samples for testing. Every area that I performed a test on a sample from was numbered.
Okay. Numbered or lettered?
Well, in the cases of the deposits on the metal frame, they were each given a number. And then on the backside of the drywall portion of the exhibit, there was a very large discoloration, a stain that consisted of light and darker areas. And I elected to test 4 different parts of that one large stain. And that got not only a number, but a number 5, but also a letter, A, B, C, or D.
A, B, C, or D? So it was 4, correct?
That's correct.
All right. And I believe, but if you could please go ahead and I think you may have already said this, what were your conclusions of testing those areas, whether they were positive for the presence of blood?
Each of those areas and everything I tested in that particular exhibit was positive for the presence of blood.
You stated that you were working with somebody else that day at the state lab. Could you say that name again?
Criminalist, that's his title, Martin Orlowitz.
And with regards to criminalist Orlowitz, what unit of the lab does he work in?
He works in the pattern evidence unit.
I'd like to ask some of the samples that you took, or the parts that you were able to cut out and make cuttings. Did you submit those for further DNA analysis inside the lab?
Yes, I swabbed the blood deposits that were on the metal frame because that was the most effective way of removing the blood from that metal surface by transferring it to a swab that had been moistened with something called digest buffer. As far as the stained area on the backing of the drywall, that had soaked into this very thin cardboard backing, and swabbing it would not have been as effective. And so what I did was I took a sterile scalpel, and I very carefully cut out a small square of the darkest stain on that cardboard backing of the drywall. I put that cutting into a coin envelope, and that coin envelope and the swabbings from the metal parts of the exhibit were forwarded to our DNA unit for DNA testing.
How did you label that cutting that went to the DNA unit for DNA testing, and how did you label the swab that went on for DNA testing?
So the cutting would have been labeled, if I might refer to my notes again.
Please do.
So as far as the metal swabbing, and I only took one of the 4 that I had available to me. I selected one as a representative sample, and the actual stain on the exhibit was exhibit MER 3B. And because this was now somewhat of a child of that, this swab was now MER-3B-1. As far as the cutting is concerned, again, it's the same exhibit, so it's going to be exhibit MER-3B. But this was that large stain area, which I called collectively stain 5, but then subcategorized each of the 4 stains in there as A, B, C, and D. And so the stain that went on for, or a portion of it that went on for DNA testing, because I didn't cut the whole stain out. The stain was large enough that I could cut out about a 1-inch square from the middle of it and still leave the rest of it behind. That I identified as MER-3B-5A.
Thank you. The DNA testing that you sent it along for, did you perform that testing yourself or someone else?
I did not.
Do you remember who that was that did do that testing?
That was performed by my colleague, criminalist Katie Swango.
And finally, Mr. McMahon, with regards to, I know we talked about a couple of specific items. It's my understanding that there were many other items that you swabbed and checked for serology. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And with regards to those, were those either ones where no blood was found or that after a physical examination, there was no stain to test? With regards to the physical items, not hairs. So excuse me, I think anything other than the hairs that you were provided.
So that would be correct. All the other items that I looked at, with maybe the exception of 2, either did not find blood on them, or my testing of what looked like it could be blood was negative.
And with regards to the 2 that you thought that you might have located blood, now let me ask, was one of them, to your recollection, a sweatshirt or a portion of a sweatshirt?
I think it was a portion of a sweater.
Okay. A portion of a sweater. If you could
Yes.
refer to your notes, I just want to make sure that we're clear.
Yes, the two items that I'm referring to are exhibits JP 216, which is a pink sweater, and this is detailed in my report dated April 21st.
And JP 216. So that's the first two initials there are JP. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And with regards to that sweatshirt, do you know what kind of vehicle that came out of? Whether or not it was an Audi that came out of? Are you aware of that?
I don't know what the source of where the item was collected from, but it's a sweater.
Sweater. Okay. And was there? You said there was one other item. Could you please
Right.
tell us what that one was?
The other one was JP 251, which was a length of twine.
And that also was a JP, I believe you said those initials.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And do you know whether that came out of a blue Audi, or do you, similar to your last answer, you don't know where that item came from?
I do not know.
All right. If I can just have a moment, please, Your Honor.
Yes.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
One of the New Hampshire State Lab has a separate DNA lab, right?
That's correct.
And do you do DNA?
I do not.
Okay. And one of the reasons that things don't go directly to DNA is DNA kind of costs a lot of money, and you want to make sure that the testing is of something that may produce a DNA result.
That's correct. The vast majority of evidence that comes to the laboratory with a request to check for blood or semen or saliva typically goes through a serological examination first. And if we find something, usually only a portion of the original item gets forwarded on for DNA testing, not the entire item. We'll cut a stain out of a garment or out of a piece of drywall, like I just explained to you. When I don't find any type of a biological material, then that's where the analysis ends.
Okay.
And nothing would go on to DNA.
Right, because if it doesn't get through you, there's likely not DNA,
That's correct.
and that a DNA test would be a waste.
That's correct.
So that's not always the case that it goes through you, right?
Well, the vast majority of it is the vast majority of the evidence is subjected to some sort of a serological analysis by either myself or a colleague of mine.
Okay.
There are some items that would go straight to DNA, like a known DNA sample of one person or another. There's no need to perform any analysis on an item of evidence, which is a known sample from a known individual.
Okay. I'm going to show you a copy of what's been marked as State's Exhibit 10. Have you seen this object before?
I have not.
Okay. And this is a full exhibit, Your Honor. Yes. A toothbrush. There's been testimony about DNA tested in the lab and results found on the toothbrush. Why was it that that didn't go through you?
I'm not sure if I can answer that. I could only surmise that for serological or biological testing, the area of interest in that particular item is so small. We're not looking for DNA on the parts of the handle. We're looking for DNA only on the part that goes into the person's mouth and makes contact with their teeth and gums. And that was so small. And the fear would be that there would be very little DNA present because it's a small surface area. And so rather than wasting sample on a serological test, because we're going to do DNA testing regardless, let's just reserve all of the sample for DNA testing. There are a few situations where even though my testing is negative, the item still goes on for DNA testing. And that's a few situations, and it's only done because we recognize that the sensitivity of the test that I perform is much lower than the sensitivity of a DNA test. So when I swab the mouth of a bottle that was left behind at a crime scene, and I test that swabbing for saliva and it's negative, that swabbing would still go on for DNA.
And essentially, we are talking about saliva, and that the area of interest on a toothbrush would be saliva.
That's correct.
And so pretty much no matter what, that's going to the DNA lab.
Yes, ma'am.
And so this isn't simply a procedure where people are doing things by rote. You actually consider the possibility of whether testing might consume DNA before DNA can actually be tested.
That's correct.
And if there's the possibility of that, you're going to send it straight for testing so that your tests don't consume or have any effect on the DNA that might be present.
That's correct.
To make sure that if it's there, it's going to be found.
Yes, ma'am.
There you had some testimony about JMT evidence, starting with the initials JMT.
Yes, ma'am.
And that was a section of black carpet, a child's t-shirt, and a child's pajama pants, right? Go ahead.
Yes.
Okay. And those, I think you were aware, were found in the trunk of a car?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. And the same area where the toothbrush was found?
That I'm not sure I was aware of at the time.
Okay. And so you tested each of these items and they were all negative for blood?
That's correct.
And you talked about the testing, that if you saw a stain that looked like it might be blood, then you would take the next step and do some screening with the chemical.
That's correct.
In the black carpet, because a stain might be there and you might miss it, you do extra tests, right?
Right. That's when we re-examine the item using the infrared light source. That's correct.
So you don't assume, okay, I can't see anything. You're going to make sure that it's not there.
That's only done when the color of the substrate, the surface that possible blood is on, is dark enough that it might, by virtue of its dark color, interfere with my ability to see the blood stain. Items that are lighter colored, it would just get a standard physical examination under normal room lighting.
So the next step, after you question, perhaps there's something there, you do that Castle
Mayor.
Testing. And the black section of carpet from the trunk was negative for blood. The child's t-shirt, you checked that for, you examined it by sight to check for stains, right?
That's correct.
And you found several.
Yes.
And you tested them to see if those stains were just child stains or blood.
Well, I'm not sure I would describe it that way, but there are a number of stains on a green sweatshirt.
Turquoise, perhaps?
Okay. I wasn't exactly sure which one you were speaking about.
All right, JMT5.
Okay. I was thinking of another item, but yeah, I conducted an examination of it. Again, if I might refer to my notes. I conducted a physical examination of this child's t-shirt, and because the sleeves of the t-shirt were dark blue, the body of the shirt was this turquoise, I conducted an additional physical exam using the infrared light source and looking for additional staining on the sleeves.
And so that was negative for the presence of blood.
That's correct.
And then there was pajama pants, a child's pajama pants found in the same area.
That's correct.
And
Well, I'm not sure where it was
the
collected
location.
from.
Okay, sorry. JMT6. That one you didn't have to go to the Castle-Meyer testing, right?
I did not.
Because you could see the item well enough to determine if there were stains characteristic of blood.
Well, in this case, like some of the other items, these pajama pants were dark gray in color. And so after examining them under normal room lighting, I conducted a re-examination using the infrared light source. And I didn't find any staining on these pajama pants at all.
So it's pretty fair to say that if there's a question in your mind, you take another step.
If one is available.
So then you did several items that had the initials at the beginning JP.
Yes,
And there's been testimony before you that JP would, and you understand that the initials reflect the officer that has collected and bagged or whatever the evidence.
I do. That's a common practice in law enforcement.
And there has been testimony that that was JP referred to an Officer Pittman. And these items were from the Audi. Were you aware of that?
At that time, no.
Okay. And same sort of testing to determine whether or not there was a presence of blood.
That's correct.
And if there was a question in your observation, you would take the next step and check for either a light source or the Castle-Meyer.
That's correct.
And the results were a little bit mixed. Some you did not find the presence of blood. Some you had to do additional screening for blood.
That's correct.
And 2 items I think that you testified of, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. About 15 items that were JP something.
Do you want me to double check your math?
We can do approximates if you want.
Well, excluding hairs. I can only find 9 that are JP.
Are you looking at your report of 1/20/22? And then
Yep, there's 2 items there.
Pardon?
2 items there.
4/21/22. The next one's 1/26/22.
Yep, those are the hairs.
Okay, and then 4/21/22.
7 items there.
7, 8, 9, 10, 13. Total.
But you're including the hairs.
Yes.
Okay. 14.
Okay. Good thing.
14 in total.
Okay. And speaking of the hairs, you found 1 specimen, and it's a JP hair, 1 specimen suitable for analysis and send it on, right?
With respect to JP 185, yes.
And then with respect to JP 202, a couple of hairs to go to the DNA.
That's correct.
And other hairs didn't actually have any DNA in them.
Well,
or you couldn't detect.
No. I guess for the remaining hairs, based upon my microscopical examination of the hairs, I had determined that they were likely unsuitable for a DNA analysis.
Okay. So then you also testified on direct about a pink woman's sweater screening positive for blood, right?
That's correct.
A length of twine, which was JP 251, screening positive for blood.
That's correct.
And you sent those two on for DNA analysis.
That's correct.
And if these items were found in a motor vehicle that had been sitting out in the weather for a very long time, subject to heat, subject to cold, and subject to mold, apparently, you were still able to find presence of blood on those items.
That's correct.
And environment can degrade blood or DNA,
Possibly, yes.
and it may not.
That's correct.
And so the fact that something has been in the environment doesn't mean that any blood that's been there has degraded.
That's correct.
And the fact that something has been subject to heat and cold doesn't mean that any blood that had been present would be degraded.
That's correct.
Thank you. I think, one moment, Your Honor, please.
This has been really hard to follow,
Oh,
you
and
all.
one more thing was you talked about the area of dry paneling that was sent on to the DNA lab as well. Drywall paneling.
Yes, ma'am.
Paneling, ceiling, I don't know what to call it. Drywall, you have it as drywall paneling, right?
Yes, ma'am.
And if there's testimony that this was taken from a ceiling, would that be consistent with your description?
Yes, although I couldn't describe it in my notes or in my report as a part of a ceiling because that's assuming I knew where it came from, and I can't take that assumption into account. So I just describe what it is as it's presented before me.
Thank you.
Let's see if any redirect can help.
Last line question you were just asked about not being able to take it for granted that the drywall that you saw necessarily came from the ceiling. Is that something where to be able to say that you'd have to talk to the person that actually took it from the ceiling or took it from a wall?
I'd either have to be there during its collection. I'd have to get its source or from where it came from someone whose opinion I trusted. Or a third option would for it to be described that way when it was submitted to the laboratory on the paperwork that's submitted with evidence. But I'm still the final say for how an item is described. That may have come from a ceiling, and I'm certain it probably did. It's just that that wasn't so apparently obvious to me that I had to describe it as what it actually was.
Thank you for that. Two other quick questions for you. You were asked a moment ago about JMT5, the T-shirt. And I believe you described how on cross-examination that the sleeves were darker, that dark substrate that you talked about earlier, and that's where you used the infrared light.
That's correct.
Did you make any notation the fact that that T-shirt was a size for an 18-month-old?
I did make a notation in my notes where I can about the garment manufacturer's name and the size. And again, I'm referring to my notes. I described exhibit JMT5 as a blue/teal long sleeve t-shirt. And Furthermore, it's a children's long sleeve T-shirt with a turquoise colored body and dark blue sleeves. The brand name is Just One U, and the size was 18M.
You were asked about the toothbrush with regards to that going not through serology but directly to DNA. And I believe that you were asked whether or not the toothbrush would have saliva on it. That a small part of the toothbrush would have saliva on it. Do you recall that question a moment ago?
To some degree, yes.
In addition to the saliva, would it also have cheek cells or other cells from the gum or the lining?
It's inferred that it would. I mean, it's a motorized toothbrush. Assuming that we use it in the fashion for which it was intended, it's reasonable to expect that the end of the toothbrush that you would insert into your mouth could bear deposits of saliva, and that saliva would contain cellular material from the gums or from the cheeks of the mouth.
Thank you very much. I have no further questions for you. Thank you.
Just also very, very quickly, the turquoise child's long sleeve T-shirt you said was specifically what age? 18 months?
Well, it said 18M on the fabric label.
Okay, so toddler-ish.
I assume so, yes.
Okay, and the pajama pants similarly?
May I look at my notes?
Sure.
That just means she was very, very small for her age.
One pair of dark gray fleece children's sleep pants with a red, white, and black winter holiday pattern. The brand was Holiday, # or hashtag, if you will, Fam Jams, FAMJAMS, size XS 4/5.
And I take it you're not going to interpret what that size means, but it's
Extra small.
okay.
And I'm guessing 4 or 5 in children's clothing typically refers to the approximate age
Okay.
of the child that would wear that size clothing.
Okay. And the pink sweater was an adult woman's sweater.
I believe so, yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Any objection?
Yes.
May I be excused?
You may.
But sir, you may step down. You are excused.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you. All right, ladies and gentlemen, it's 2:30. Perfect timing for our mid-afternoon break. So I remind you, don't discuss the case with each other. Don't do any independent research. I'm going to ask the witness, if you would, just to stay there for just a moment so I can let the jurors go. We'll see you in about 15 minutes. All rise for the jury, please.
So yeah, that was really difficult to follow testimony, but also super important. And so I hope that the jury was
Thank you, sir. You can step down.
paying very close attention, and that they'll get somehow. I've never been on a jury. I've been called to jury duty and dismissed, but I've never sat on a jury, so I don't know, how much interpretation they're able to get about this type of stuff. Maybe it's written in the actual report that they get, with all the evidence that they get in their room. But this is, again, the forensic evidence that has to come in to compensate for the fact that they don't have a body, right? And so he was talking about just testing for different, testing for blood on various items. And it sounds like, excuse me, it sounds like he was saying that the clothing items that were found did not have evidence of blood on them. But I don't know how much that actually means to the in terms of prosecution, because we don't know for sure. We don't know for sure what she was wearing when she died. I could be missing something on this. I don't know if he found. It didn't sound like to me that he found anything, but there must have been something more to that testimony that I'm missing. And, apologies for not being able to, I do have strengths and I do have weaknesses. One of my weaknesses is that I am not an actual trial lawyer. That's true. She could have bled internally, Tiggy girl. I'm honestly going to have to go back and look. No, I don't think you really missed much, except for, some technical evidence that could come into play. But in all honesty, I don't think that his testimony hurt the state's case. I don't think it helped the defense. I think the defense is just continuing to just kind of look through holes to climb through.
Yeah.
Ooh, there's some speaking in the court that we can hear.
We're back at 2:45.
Oh, okay. Anyway, so, to me, it doesn't really sound to me like it's, like it's hurting the prosecution's case or helping the defense's case, but it's just added testimony to what was tested and what was determined in the testing. But it's hard to believe that they would, right, Christina? It's hard to believe that the state would put that witness on without him having found something. Yeah, I would imagine that Scout, do you know if we know was it ever described what clothes she was wearing at the time? Did Kayla say in her affidavit or her proffer what Harmony was wearing? Because I just haven't seen that myself. Not that it's not there. I just personally haven't seen it myself. Lollipop Guild says, not a lot of explanation comes back with the jury when deliberating, and they have to rely on what was explained in court or discern from their own knowledge. Wow. That's kind of scary, to be honest with you. I'm going to have to go back and listen to see if I can pick up anything that I might after court today. I'm afraid to go back now and try to look for it, because it was so long and I don't want to miss them coming back into session. I did upload some. Let's see. Landry says that Elaine kept asking about a pair of leggings, but that may not really narrow it down. Yeah. I was looking for something else. I was picking through my digital files and came across some things that I want to share with you as little palette cleansers. So, excuse me. Queen Bella says, I think she said black leggings and a pink jacket hoodie. She thinks. Right. Queen Bella. So now you're jogging my memory about how she said something on the stand about what she was wearing, because there was questions about the leggings and things like that. And Kayla described what she remembered her wearing at the time. Right. And the thing is that Kayla's testimony is so questionable all the time. Yeah, that she cut off Harmony's clothes in the shower. I do recall her now that I'm going back, I do recall her describing what she remembers Harmony to be wearing at the time. But again, her testimony is so unreliable that you just, it's, if it would be funny, here's what would be funny to me is if the defense tries to use Kayla's testimony to discredit whatever was just presented, because the defense took an extraordinary amount of time. Yeah, Star Wars hoodie and leggings, but he just described what they found. So it's not clear how they found what they found. What they found was in the ceiling, right, with the other evidence, or maybe it was part of what was in the car. And that's the other part that I'm confused about, is where those actual items were found, those items of clothing that were tested. So again, my weakness is I'm not a trial lawyer. And also I'm operating everything all on my own. So sometimes I get distracted. So you think it was the car, Angela Mills? Yeah. So, testing clothes that were in the car, anyone with kids knows that you always have kids' clothes in the car, even when you're not homeless, even when you're not, or unhoused, as we might say. So the fact that there was no blood evidence on random clothes that were found in the car, and, Kayla talks about cutting the items, helping him cut the items off of her. They didn't describe that item that they were just talking about as having been cut off of, have cuts through it and stuff like that. So I just think it would be funny if the defense is trying to use Kayla's testimony as the only truth in which to try to dispute whatever evidence was just. Yeah, you always have to have a change of clothes, especially when your child is frequently wetting themselves because you're not giving them a place to do. Christina, sickens me to type this. Most likely, if her remains were recovered, probably wouldn't be much more than. Yeah, yes, agree. Yeah, I mean, the 18-month-old shirt could belong to the toddler that was with them in the car, right? But also, Harmony was tiny. So it's possible that she could fit in an 18-month shirt that is, that is sizable, right? That, like a loose shirt. Like, I had one kid that was really big for his age, and I had a kid that was small for his age. And, my kid that was small for his age would fit into my older son's clothes. It's just, and you're always switching clothes up and stuff. Think of the two little boys. They probably had horrible diaper. Yeah, they probably all did, because it sounds like she was having accidents and they weren't changing her even right after the accidents. They weren't cleaning her up after the accidents. And so it's just horrific to think of the smell and the condition that their bodies were in as a result of that. How, you can get sick from having all of that, that filth around you. So, but I do want to show you some things that might brighten your day a little bit. This is my dog, Steve. That's my doggy. So sometimes you hear me paying attention to Steve, or when you hear a really loud bark, that's my dog. My dog has a bark like a German Shepherd. The little dog sometimes you hear barking, That's the neighbor's dog behind me. So that's my my sweet man. He is the sweetest guy. Yeah, he's a golden doodle. His name is Steve. And yes, I did name him after Steve Jobs. Because I worked with Steve Jobs and he was really hard to work for. So it was, and it's kind of like a tribute a little bit. It's like a tribute to him, but also kind of like a parody, because I pictured being able to say, sit, Steve, lay down, Steve. But I just came across this as I was looking for some other stuff. This is the cover of Fortune magazine when we released iTunes. This is before actually the iTunes Music Store is what it was. And this was a 4-hour photo shoot. This was a 4-hour photo shoot that I was there for during the whole photo shoot. It was a really fun one because Steve was in a good mood that day because he was hanging out with Sheryl Crow. So yeah, when I posted on Facebook about my new dog and I named him Steve, Steve Jobs' former assistant was like, I love it. She was his assistant for like 10 years and it was pretty funny. It was actually my son's idea to name him Steve. It wasn't my idea, but when he suggested it, I fell out laughing because I wanted to name my dog a regular dog name. So I do have a little bit more show and tell for you. This is a little bit dark, but it's also in line with today, which is Valentine's Day, and you're getting a preview of what I'm going to be posting on Checkmate Humanity in a bit. You can tragedy pimp Valentine's Day even. You can even tragedy pimp Valentine's Day. What you're looking at is a Valentine's Day card that Lana Oriani sent to Chris Watts in prison, signed from his children. Do you see that? You can actually tragedy pimp even on holidays, even on Valentine's Day. You can even send, if you're someone like Lana Oriani, you can send a Valentine's Day card to the man who murdered his children from his children. Yeah. I mean, the sickness just doesn't stop. It just doesn't stop. It's never ending. And this is kind of funny right here. One time she reached out to me in the middle of our litigation and tried to get me to talk to her. And she approached me so nice. I'm going to take that. She approached me all nice and stuff. And she's like, possible phone call. And I just responded, fuck you. Yeah, I mean, good question, Tiggy girl. All right. Looks like court is coming back in session. And just a reminder of why we're here. There's the sweet little girl. Picture of her in better days. Do what in particular, Lollipop? She did a lot of things to a lot of people.
Please rise for the jurors.
Johnny. She was suing me. Oh, you want to see what she was suing me for, Teresa? I'll show you. This is literally what it said at the top of the paperwork. Defamation of character. That's what she sued me for. Defamation of character. Oh yeah. You bring up the Capri Sun. I just happen to have that right here. Capri Sun. This is Lena trying to show us that she wasn't drinking boxed wine in her car. It was Capri Sun that she put in the boxed wine.
Thank you, Your Honor. The state calls Martin Orlowitz.
All right, next witness. Let's see who this is. Oh, thank you for becoming a member, Rebellious Rose.
Mr. Orlowitz, remain standing.
Oh, yes, that's right.
You swear that the testimony that you're about to provide this jury will be the jury
Lollipop, she did.
with the pains and penalties of perjury.
I do.
Thank you. You have a seat. Make yourself comfortable. Mr. Orlowitz, can you start by stating and spelling your full name for the record?
My name is Martin Orlowitz, MartinOrlowicz.
And Mr. Orlowitz, how are you presently employed?
I work for the state of New Hampshire State Police Forensic Laboratory.
What's your current position with the forensic laboratory?
I'm a latent print examiner.
And how long have you worked for the state of New Hampshire the New Hampshire State Lab?
Since October of 2019.
And prior to that, any experience with a forensic laboratory?
I worked from October of 2016 to July of 2019. I worked for the State of Alaska Scientific Crime Detection Laboratory.
And how long were you with the Alaska State Crime Lab?
Between October 2016 and July 2019, so almost 3 years.
What was the role that you held while you were while you were employed at the Alaska State Crime Lab?
I was doing latent print processing as well as crime scene processing for the lab.
And when you say crime scene processing, what did that look like when you were at the Alaska State Crime Lab?
The crime scene processing that I did for the state of Alaska was a accessory role where law enforcement would call for an assist if they needed specialty work done at a crime scene, searching for fingerprints or tire tracks or blood, those sorts of things.
And was that for the entire state? So all the way from Utqiagvik up north to Ketchikan down south?
Yes, it was.
You also mentioned latent print analysis.
Yes.
And did you do that in your current role or in your role with the Alaska State Crime Lab or both?
My role in Alaska was more specifically just latent print processing, which was evidence processing to search for latent prints or fingerprints, as they're more colloquially known. In New Hampshire, I do the second portion of latent print processing, which is the analysis and comparison.
And which unit for the state of New Hampshire, which units have you worked in?
The name of my unit is the Pattern Evidence Unit.
What are your primary duties and responsibilities in that unit?
In New Hampshire, I'm doing latent print processing, so processing evidence to find fingerprints or friction ridge evidence, as well as doing the comparisons, so analyzing any impressions that I find to determine if they're of value for comparison, and then comparing them to known record impressions to see if I can determine the source that they may have come from.
Mr. Orlowitz, what areas do you specialize in at the state lab?
Just fingerprints.
And I want to talk about your background, your training. Can you tell us what your educational background is?
I have a Bachelor of Science degree from the University of New Hampshire in biology. That's my educational experience. Outside of that, my training specific to my duties, I went through roughly a 6-month program in the state of Alaska to learn how to process evidence for latent prints. And then when I moved to New Hampshire and started at the lab here, I went through roughly another 10-month training program to do the analysis and comparison portion. This training program is sort of like a residency program. So it's shadowing personnel who are already employed at the laboratory while doing my own independent research and study in those areas to become competent. And then there's final competency exams before I'm allowed to do any independent work.
You mentioned your Bachelor's of Science. What year did you obtain that degree?
2015.
I want to talk about the New Hampshire State Police training program for friction ridge detail. Are you familiar with that program?
Yes.
And can you tell the jurors what it is?
So that was the residency program that I was just describing. So it's an in-depth program where any trainee, myself included, who goes through is learning about friction ridge processing, analysis, and comparison for an extended period of time in order to become competent in the field.
And Mr. Orlowitz, do you currently hold any certifications in your field?
I do.
Can you tell the jurors what that is?
I have a certification from the International Association for Identification for latent print examining.
Can you also tell the jurors what you have to do to become a latent print examiner?
In order to, there's an application process to take the certification test. So I had to put together a packet showing my experience and training in the field, as well as showing that I was currently employed in the field and doing latent print comparisons. I believe the certification mandates that you have to have at least 2 years experience doing latent print comparisons before you can take the certification test. So that was submitted to the certification board.
Rebellious Rose.
And then when they deemed that I met the qualifications for the test, they sent the written and practical portions of the test, which I completed and passed.
When did you obtain that certification? What year?
2021.
And Mr. Orlowitz, about how many fingerprints would you say you've personally examined over the course of your career, both here and in Alaska?
Thousands.
Is the New Hampshire State Police Forensic Laboratory accredited?
Yes.
And can you tell the jurors what that accreditation is?
Our accreditation is through the American National Accreditation Board. It's a third-party company, essentially, that reviews any work policies at our laboratory and makes sure that they are meeting industry standard, and then also makes sure that we are adhering to those policies in our day-to-day work. They come through every 4 years for an on-site review and every 2 years, I believe, for a document review to make sure that we can hold our accreditation for the laboratory.
And Mr. Orlowitz, as part of your role with the lab, do you have to undergo continuing education?
Yes.
And can you tell the jurors what that is, what that requirement is?
So in order to maintain my certification through the IAI, I have to have a minimum number of continuing education credits in each 4-year period between my certification tests. So I'm routinely searching for new courses to help bolster my training and experience that in regards to latent prints.
How often would you say you undergo those new courses that you mentioned?
I'm actually in one right now, so fairly often.
Fairly often.
Yes.
Mr. Orlowitz, have you ever been qualified as an expert in fingerprint and palm print analysis in a superior court here in New Hampshire?
Yes.
How many times?
Once that I remember off the top of my head.
And how about a superior court in Alaska?
Not for fingerprint analysis, no.
Your Honor, at this point, the state moves to have criminalist Orlowitz qualified as an expert in the field of fingerprint and palm print identification.
Any objection?
I have no objection to him giving his opinion.
The court finds him so qualified.
Did you hear that? She said, I have no
Mr. Orlowitz,
objection
before we
to him
move
giving
on,
his opinion.
I want to teach the jurors exactly what fingerprint palm print analysis is.
Okay.
Have you had an opportunity to look at several slides, demonstrative slides?
Yes.
do you feel like those slides would aid the jurors in understanding what you do, exactly what it is that you do?
Yes, I do.
Your Honor, at this point, permission to publish.
May we approach?
Yes.
So I don't know if you caught that, but when Bootleg Elaine was asked if she has any objections, they've said that for each expert. You know, I've never heard a defense lawyer say that. We have no objection to him giving his opinion. I've never heard a defense lawyer say that. It's almost like they have to get on the record, well, this is your opinion. And so what this guy, I think, is about to testify to are the palm prints that were found near the ceiling and the ceiling vent. I remember that being mentioned in the opening statements about actual palm prints of that match Adam Montgomery found, you know, near where Harmony was in the ceiling. So my expectation is that that's what he's going to testify to. And of course, the defense is going to try to find holes to poke in this. And Rebellious Rose, thanks again very much. And I will stay tuned at the break for a special court clip for you. Yeah, exactly. It's John Pryor. John Pryor, he's so sassy. If you guys don't know who John Pryor is, he's the defense attorney for Chad Daybell, the one that tried to get out of the, tried to get himself off of the case because he felt that he didn't have enough time to prepare for a death penalty case. And, you know, Chad and Lori have been in jail since 2019, I think it is. Jesus. No. Sorry. They've been in jail since 2020. Sorry. So it's just crazy. Yeah, bootleg Elaine. Get her a Snickers bar. And it's so awkward for these witnesses during sidebars when, you know, they have to just sit here and look calm and patient for the camera. They can't be looking at anything else. They can just look around at the jury. You know, you realize there's people there in the courtroom. He can't make eye contact with them, or, you know, unless it would be really awkward to stare people down, right? Well, they don't have any listed, Evil Queen. They only have 2 witnesses listed. One is a prison inmate, and the other is somebody who already testified, which is Harmony's foster mother, one of her foster parents. And then they said, we also reserve the right to call any other witnesses that are on the state's list.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so it looks like they're...
Just to clarify, the demonstrative photos that you reviewed prior to testifying today, nothing to do with this case. Is that correct?
No, as far as I know, they're just stock images of fingerprints or friction-ridged skin.
So, Mr. Rolowitz, what is a fingerprint?
A fingerprint or friction-ridged skin is the skin that's on the grasping surfaces of your palms and your fingers, as well as on the bottoms of your feet and your toes. Its name implies its function. Friction-ridged skin provides friction to those surfaces of your hands and your feet in order for you to be able to better grab things.
And what are some of the basic fundamentals in fingerprint, in the science of fingerprint and palm print analysis, identification and analysis?
So 2 of the basic fundamentals in fingerprint analysis and comparison are that the friction-ridged skin that you are born with is unique to you. So any individual has unique patterns and flows of friction-ridged skin across their hand. And then the other fundamental is persistency of that detail. So the details that are present in your friction ridge skin should persist throughout your life, barring any catastrophic change.
And the images that are depicted on the screen there, what do they depict?
These two images, the image on the left shows a fingerprint, specifically the distal phalange of a finger, the one furthest from the palm. It's showing the friction ridge skin present on that. And then the photo on the right is showing a palm print, or a portion of the palm print. This portion of the palm is called the interdigital palm. It's just underneath where the fingers meet the palm, and it's showing the friction ridge skin there.
Can you tell the jurors what a latent impression is?
Latent impressions are, rather than your physical skin, your friction ridge skin, a latent impression is a chance impression that might be left behind when an individual touches an object. So the residue that is present on your skin may deposit itself onto a surface, leaving a copy, essentially, of your friction ridge skin on that surface. It can also be the inverse, where if a surface is dirty, your friction ridge skin could lift up the contaminant that's on that surface, leaving almost a negative image of your friction ridge skin behind.
Can you tell the jurors what a known impression or a known print is?
Known impressions they're also referred to as exemplar impressions or record impressions. So these impressions are taken anytime someone is fingerprinted. These are a known recording of an individual's friction ridge skin. Traditionally, these were done with ink, by rubbing ink onto someone's finger and then rolling that finger on a piece of paper to record that. Now there's digital systems that capture the same information.
And how are fingerprints deposited onto an item?
So again, latent prints, it's a chance recording. So there's a possibility of when someone touches something that friction ridge detail can be left behind if some of the residue that's on your hand stays on the surface, or if residue that's on the surface comes away on your hand.
So is it like what you'd see on TV where if someone touches something, it always leaves a fingerprint?
Not always. There's a variety of factors that may inhibit deposition of friction ridge detail. The easiest one that I can think of is if someone was wearing gloves. When I work in the laboratory, I wear gloves so that I don't leave fingerprints on the things that I'm working on. That's the easiest way to inhibit deposition.
What determines, other than the gloves, what determines whether fingerprints are left on an object?
There's other types of surfaces that are very difficult for fingerprints to be left behind on. So for instance, clothes, these types of porous surfaces, they don't hold friction ridge detail or fingerprints very well. Surfaces that do hold fingerprints very well are nice, smooth, non-porous surfaces, or things like pieces of paper, the adhesive side of tape. Those things hold fingerprints very well. It also depends on environmental factors. So if the surface is very wet, the likelihood that a fingerprint may remain goes down. If a fingerprint may also be deposited, but then later be washed away if it's raining. So there's a variety of factors that go into deposition.
And how long do fingerprints generally remain on an object?
It's difficult to say exactly how long a fingerprint may stay on an object. Again, it depends on environmental conditions. So if, to give an example, if a fingerprint is left on an exterior window in the baking sun, and then it rains the next day, and then we go through some New Hampshire weather and it snows or we have a nor'easter, there's a higher chance that that fingerprint is going to be washed away or wiped away than, say, a fingerprint that is inside a house on a metal fridge that gets touched, every day. Likely there will be fingerprints there much longer.
I want to switch gears just a bit. Once you've received a fingerprint, how do you go about analyzing it?
When I'm looking at fingerprints, I'm trying to analyze any of the information that's present within them. So the information that I'm looking at is a macroscopic to a microscopic feature. Generally, we describe these as level 1, 2, and 3 detail.
Mr. Orlowitz, how is an identification made and a comparison conducted?
A comparison is conducted by taking the analyzed latent impression and then comparing it to known impressions or a record impression to determine if there's the same source or if they're not the same source. An identification specifically is a conclusion that can be rendered if it's my determination that the latent print and the record impression have enough detail in similarity in order for me to say that they came from the same source.
And so the screen shows this methodology ACE. Can you describe that to the jurors?
This is the analysis, comparison, and evaluation methodology that I use on every case that I work. This is the methodology that most latent print examiners in the field use. So analysis is, again, assessing the detail. So assessing those macroscopic and microscopic features, those 3 levels of detail. Once that's done, I would move to the comparison phase, comparing the latent impression that I analyzed to known record impressions. And then my evaluation is my final conclusion of my comparison phase. So whether I identify the print, which is, as I said, when it's my opinion that the 2 impressions came from the same source, or if I exclude the print, meaning that the latent impression and the record impression, I believe, are from different sources. There's a third conclusion I can come to called inconclusive. This conclusion is used if the record impressions that I have available to me are too low quality in order for me to definitively say whether the latent print came from them or did not come from them.
Mr. Orlowitz, can you walk us through that identification process and the different levels of detail that you're looking for to make a comparison?
So during my analysis, again, assessing the details present in the latent print. I like to think of it as starting with a macroscopic view of the impression and then moving to a microscopic view. There's 3 levels of detail. The first level of detail is ridge flow. So how the ridges themselves are flowing across the finger or across the hand. In fingerprints specifically, there are 3 pattern types that are typical to see. There is an arch pattern type, a loop pattern type, and a whorl pattern type. Those are helpful in determining anatomical source and orientation. If I can see a pattern type, I can determine this likely came from a distal phalange portion of the finger, and I can usually determine which orientation is up on that, which direction would be up on that latent impression. Because all I'm assessing with level 1 is the ridge flow, I would not make an identification just based off of that ridge flow. Lots of people in the population share pattern types. So a lot of people have whorls, a lot of people have loops, a lot of people have arches. That's a macroscopic detail, but the microscopic detail, level 2 and 3, is where I can begin to make an identification.
So let's discuss level 2 detail.
The level 2 detail is ridge path formation or deviation. So this is moving from looking at the entire latent print to looking at one single ridge at a time. And what I'm determining and looking at in my analysis is where these ridges are ending, where they're splitting, where there's smaller ridges. So I'm searching for attributes specific to each ridge. A grouping of these attributes can be used to identify a latent print to a source.
So I see bifurcations up there. Can you describe what that is for the jurors?
Bifurcation would be where a ridge splits from one ridge into 2 ridges. A ridge ending is exactly what it sounds like. It's where a ridge ends. And then a dot or a short ridge is just a very small segment of ridge instead of a longer portion.
And can you just identification process in terms of level 2 detail? What are we looking at on this slide?
So this is this photo is showing specifically those 3 features that I just mentioned: bifurcations, ridge endings, and dots. It's pointing them out in the greater ridge flow in the larger image, and then zooming in to show you the exact feature in the smaller images.
Let's discuss level 3 detail.
Level 3 detail, this is the most microscopic level of detail that I use during my comparisons. This level of detail goes from looking at a single ridge to looking at the exact characteristics and attributes of that one ridge. So where the pores are present on top of the ridges, what the edges, the edge shape of the ridges look like. This level of detail is not commonly recorded in latent impressions or record impressions because it is so microscopic. But when it is present, it is highly discriminating and highly useful in identification and exclusion decisions.
Can an identification be made in all cases?
No.
And what does it mean if you cannot find a fingerprint when you're during your analysis?
Do you mean if I don't develop any on evidence, or?
Correct, yes.
So if no fingerprints are developed on evidence that I'm processing, I can't say whether or not that item was touched or had ever been touched. Like I said before, there's a large number of factors that go into deposition of a latent print, as well as if that latent print remains on the surface. And I have no knowledge or control of those factors before the evidence gets to the laboratory.
So if a fingerprint or friction ridge is not observed on one of the items you're analyzing, does it mean that that was not touched?
No.
And I think you touched on this earlier, but speaking generally, what variables may cause a fingerprint not to be detected on one of the items that you're analyzing?
The fingerprints may be wiped away over time if an object contacts another object, or if something is cleaned, as well as environmental factors. So latent print residue is a combination of waters, fats, amino acids. Over time, those things degrade, they evaporate. So there's a potential that the print could itself just disappear.
Mr. Orlowitz, I want to switch gears and discuss State v. Adam Montgomery. Did you conduct analysis in this matter?
Yes.
And what did you process?
I processed 5 items of evidence that were submitted to the laboratory for latent print impressions.
And I want to begin with an item with the evidence number JD47. Does that item stand out to you?
Yes.
What was that item, or what is that item?
I remember that item being a red Igloo brand cooler.
Do you think you'd recognize that if you saw it today?
Yes.
Your Honor, may I approach?
Yes, you may.
So, Mr. Orlowitz, I'm showing you what's been marked for identification as State's Exhibit 29. Do you recognize that item?
Yes, I do.
And what's depicted in this image?
This is JD47, the red Igloo brand cooler that I processed at the laboratory.
Is that a true and correct copy of the item that day?
Yes, it appears so.
Your Honor, the state moves to strike State's Exhibit 29 for identification.
Objection. All right, the ID is stricken. It's entered as a full exhibit. It may be published.
And so if you can just point to, let's talk about this. Did the item arrive in your laboratory that way, appearing as it does in this image?
To my recollection, yes, it did.
And are there stickers placed on this item?
There are, yes, several.
And had this item, at the point that this image was taken, had it undergone analysis?
I don't recall if it had gone through my laboratory analysis at this point. I believe I don't want to speculate on that. I don't recall if that was before analysis, but I believe it might have been.
Mr. Orlowitz, I'm showing you what's been admitted as State's Exhibit 28.
Okay.
Having seen this item, does that refresh your recollection on whether or not image State's Exhibit 29 had undergone analysis?
Again, I don't believe it went through latent print analysis before that image was taken.
Okay. At some point, did it?
Yes, it did.
And you conducted that analysis?
Yes.
And again, you identified it in the photograph there. Would you recognize that item if you saw it today?
Yes.
Mr. Orlowitz, I'm showing you it's been marked for identification as State's Exhibit 73, and I'm just going to ask that you stand. Do you recognize this item?
Yes, I do.
Is this the item that you conducted testing on?
Yes, it is.
Remove it from the bottom, from the baggage.
All right, here's the cooler. So I guess he tested for palm prints on this cooler. Wow.
The igloo cooler that you mentioned examining, is this that item?
Yes, it is.
How do you know that it's that item?
I recognize the item from when I processed it. I also believe if it's the same packaging or the packaging is present inside from when I analyzed it at the laboratory, my initials should be on a evidence tape seal. It looks like it may have been repackaged since I processed it.
I'll be honest with y'all.
This is a true and correct.
I don't know if I'll ever look at a cooler
Yes,
like that
it
the
is.
same again.
Your Honor, I move to strike by view of State's Exhibit 73.
Objection? Objection.
The idea is stricken. It's marked as a full exhibit.
May I publish?
Yes, you may.
Me too, Stacy. I actually thought it was smaller, but still. Scout, I think you're asking if Adam already pled guilty to something. He hasn't pled guilty to anything. He has admitted to things, but he has not pled guilty to them yet. And it's just legal.
Mr. Orlowitz, you mentioned
Technicalities.
processing that item, analyzing it. What were the results of that analysis?
I did not find any friction ridge detail on that exhibit.
No
Conceded
friction
guilt.
ridge detail.
Right.
That's correct.
Your Honor, may I approach?
So he just said that he found no friction ridge evidence on that exhibit. Yeah, I think many families across America and beyond have coolers just like that for their. Yep. Kayla's mom testified that she used it for baseball games, you know, for sandwiches and stuff like that. So many. Yeah, exactly, Teresa. So many families walk in and out of games with those exact types of coolers. It's not an actual plea.
Mr. Olowitz, I'm showing you what's been marked for identification as States Exhibits 109 through 135. And I'm just going to ask that you review each of those items in turn and just look up when you have an opportunity to review all of them.
I'm showing the definition of an Alford plea on the screen right now. It allows a defendant to plead guilty and accept a plea bargain even if they claim they are innocent. So it may be something that comes later, but it hasn't been an
Yes, I do.
official plea yet. He hasn't.
These are images
official pleading.
that I took or generated in relation to my latent print processing and analysis and comparison for this case.
Are those true and correct photographs of the images or the items that are depicted?
Yes, they are.
Publish. So strike ID for States Exhibit. What's marked for identification is items 109 through 135.
No objection. The ID is stricken, they're entered as a full exhibit.
So, Mr. Orlowitz, switching now to the white metal ceiling. It's MER 3A and 3D. So metal ceiling, a vent, and a section of drywall. Did you have an opportunity to analyze those items?
Yes, I did.
And based on your analysis, were you able to develop friction ridge details for those items?
I was able to document friction ridge detail on MER 3D, which was a section of drywall with metal framing, as well as MER 3A, which was a ceiling vent, a white ceiling vent.
And did you denote those friction ridge details?
All of the friction ridge areas that I documented were designated with an L number. So L1 and so on as more would be documented.
And was that L1 through L13?
Yes, it was.
And so the image that we're looking at now, what are we looking at there?
This is an image that I took to show the rough location of the first area that I documented, L1, on exhibit MER 3D. So where the small adhesive tag with the ruler on it is, that's the rough location of L1.
And if you can just point that out on the screen there, Mr. Orlowitz. And so does that item, that sticker that you just pointed to, does it say something on it?
It says L1 on it. It's labeled.
And is that just another photo of L1?
Yes.
And what does this image show us?
This is showing the rough location of the next two areas that I documented, L2 and L3. They are similarly labeled as L1 with the small adhesive scales in this area.
So that's L2, L3. Closer version.
Yes.
And those are the stickers that you mentioned.
Yes.
What does this image show us?
This is showing the location of the next three areas that I documented, L4, L5, and L6, with their related labels.
And what does this image show us? Can you back up one? What does this image show us, Mr. Horowitz?
This is a different angle of those same three areas, L4 through L6.
Can you just point to the jurors or
This is L4, L5, and L6.
And what is this item?
This is exhibit MER 3A. This is that ceiling vent. This is a photo that I took to show the location of several designated areas that were on, I guess I would call it the underside of it. So the side that would typically be in a ceiling, not the visible side of it.
And can you identify in that photograph just each of the areas that you designated?
The areas present in this are excuse me, L7, L8, L9, and L10 in that corner. There's another tag over here, but I'm not sure what the designation is on that one.
Let's focus on L7 through L10.
This is a closer view of those same four areas from that front left corner in the previous photo.
And just for those in the back that can't see, can you just point out?
Again, L7, L8, L9, and L10, the furthest.
Which of those items had sufficient details that you can compare them to known impressions?
During my analysis, I determined that some of these areas had multiple sections of ridge detail in them. So they were subdivided out. So instead of just being L8, I subdivided out to L8A through L8E, for example. So 5 impressions in that one area. Of all the impressions that were present in this case, L6, L7B, L8A, L8D, L9, L11, L10A through L10C, and L13 were all determined to be sufficient to move on for comparison.
Okay, and this is showing States Exhibit 116. I want to take a look at the prints that you found, beginning with, you mentioned L7. I want to look at that first, and so it's blown up here. If you could point out L7 again, the friction.
L7 is in this area.
Okay, and what did you do with L7? How did you analyze it?
So again, moving back to how I described the analysis phase before, L7 particularly was 2 impressions. So I sub-designated those L7A and L7B. Looking at the details present, the level 1, 2, and 3 detail present in those 2 impressions, L7A I determined was not identifiable. So I would not be moving forward with that impression to comparison. There's not enough detail present in it that I believed was reliable to make any sort of conclusion with. L7B, on the other hand, I determined to be identifiable based on the detail present in it.
And just for those that can't see, can you point out those items, L7A and L7B?
L7A is the impression on the left of the photo, this area here. L7B is this impression on the right of the photo, this larger area.
And what analysis did those impressions undergo?
So the analysis that I'm doing for all of these impressions is the same as I've described before, looking at the 3 levels of detail, documenting detail that's present in them, particularly when I'm marking up an analysis image like this, I will mark level 2 features that are present, or if there are reliable, what I believe to be reliable level 3 features that are present in the impression, I'll mark those up as well. So I'll put like a small green dot at the end of an ending ridge, or at a bifurcation, or around a dot, or if there's a section with pores that I can see, I could shade that a different color, and I can use that group of features later in my comparison. There are very small green dots at the end of these ridges or these bifurcations that are present in this image.
And the large line at the top, what does that indicate?
The in my field, we would call that a horseshoe. The horseshoe line at the top of the impression means that I have deemed it to be identifiable. So any impression that has a horseshoe over it, it's denoting 2 things. One, that I've determined that that is a fingerprint impression specifically, so from a finger, as well as that I believe it's identifiable.
And what is written next to L7A?
Next to L7A is NI, is written NI, which stands for not identifiable.
With respect to L7B, what was your next step in that analysis?
The next step after analysis would be my comparison.
Okay, and let me stop you there. When you were analyzing the items that you received, did you have anything to compare those items to? Any known samples, known prints?
When the evidence came into the laboratory, I was not supplied any known impressions to compare to.
Okay, and I believe you're going to say the next step of your analysis, and I'm moving to State's Exhibit 118. What is this image showing us?
This is my comparison chart. So this shows the latent image from the evidence on the left-hand side, and then the image on the right is from a record impression or exemplar impression. Excuse me. So comparing the feature, I'm in this image, I'm marking features that I marked in my analysis onto the record impression to determine if the 2 have enough similarity in order for me to establish an identification. And then I would create this chart showing the areas of correspondence that led me to my identification conclusion.
Were you able to identify the person that deposited that print?
Yes, I was.
And who was it that you identified?
Adam Montgomery.
And can you show the jurors the comparison? Stand up.
Got to remove her? Yes.
Mr. Orlowitz, at some point during your involvement on this matter, did you receive known prints for Adam Montgomery?
Yes, I did.
Did you receive any other known prints?
I also received known prints of Kayla Montgomery.
And I believe you said you made a comparison and you received a result. Can you remind the jurors what that result was?
Yes. For this latent L7B, I identified the left middle finger of Adam Montgomery as the source.
And how many levels of detail are present in this analysis?
In this particular analysis, the levels of detail that I used were level 1 and level 2. The level 3 detail present in the latent impression was spotty or non-existent at best. And so not much of it was used, not much or any of it was used for the comparison phase.
And when you say L1 and or L2, that's level 1 or level 2?
Yes, I'm sorry, I'm just
Don't want to be
level 1
confused
and level
by-
2. I'm sorry about that.
And again, you mentioned level 3 being rare.
It is rare, yes.
Let's take a look at another print that you found. I want to focus on L8. Can you point the jurors where
This is
L8?
L8.
So I'm showing what's been published or admitted and published as State's Exhibit 119. What does this image show us, Mr. Rolowitz?
This is a photograph that I took of the latent area, L8. So there are multiple impressions present that I further sub-designated during my analysis, but this is a photo that I took during processing of that exhibit.
And those sub-designations, do you recall what they were?
Yes, they were L8A through L8E.
And does this image show an alternative light source?
It does, yes.
Can you tell the jurors what that is, why you use it?
An alternative light source is a forensic lighting application that is typically used in conjunction, at least in the laboratory, with a dye stain or some sort of fluorescent chemical. What this enables us to do is remove background color or pattern from the evidence in order to better visualize friction ridge detail that's been developed on that item.
And now this is State's Exhibit 120. What does this show us?
This is my analysis image of L8A through L8E.
And what was your analysis? What was the results? Were you able to develop? Go ahead.
Sorry. My initial analysis was that 3 areas were identifiable: L8A, L8C, and L8D, I believed to be identifiable. L8B and L8E, I determined to be not identifiable and would not be moving forward with those to comparison. During the course of my analysis, I reanalyzed L8C and determined that the detail present in that was not enough for me to reliably move forward with that impression to a comparison. So I determined that L8C was also not identifiable. And so now L8A and L8D are identifiable impressions.
And how did your analysis proceed with those items?
The same analysis methodology that I've been describing. These were all determined to be L8A and L8D were determined to be fingerprint impressions. That's the horseshoe over the top of both of them. So I would be comparing fingerprints to these.
And who did you compare those two?
I compared Adam Montgomery to these impressions.
And were you able to identify the L8A friction ridges from MER 3A?
Yes, I was.
And who did you identify those to?
I identified those to Adam Montgomery.
Which finger of Adam Montgomery?
I believe the left middle.
And how many levels, with respect to L8A, how many levels of detail were present?
I'm not sure. Without looking at my chart, I'm not 100% sure. But in any latent impression, any of the 3 levels of detail can be present and can be used for a comparison. In most of these impressions, I was using level 1 and level 2 detail to arrive at my identifications.
With respect to L8D, were you able to identify friction ridge details from that item?
Yes, I was.
And who did you identify as the source of those?
I identified Adam Montgomery,
Which finger of Adam Montgomery?
the left little.
Let's look at another print that you found. This one, L9. This is States Exhibit 121. Can you tell us what we're observing here?
This is my analysis of L9. This impression I analyzed to be a simultaneous deposition, meaning that both areas present in this image are from one simultaneous touch. Both fingers came down at the same time and left these impressions. I determined that based on the angle of contact as well as deposition distortion present in the images. So this is a identifiable simultaneous fingers impression.
Can you show the jurors how that would occur using the screen there? The
Generally,
simultaneous
if
impression.
two fingers come down at the same time, in this case, at a higher angle of contact, both impressions would be left at the same time.
And how is this analyzed? How did you analyze it?
As I said, this I analyzed this to be a simultaneous fingers impression.
And who did you compare L9 friction ridge details to?
I compared this to Adam Montgomery.
What were the results of that comparison?
I identified Adam Montgomery, specifically his left middle and left ring fingers, as having made this simultaneous impression.
And I'm showing you States Exhibit 122. What is that showing the jurors?
This is my comparison chart of L9. So the latent impressions are the images at the top of the screen, and then the known record impressions are on the lower section.
You mentioned that these are Adam Montgomery's fingerprints. Which finger specifically from Adam Montgomery?
Specifically the left middle and left ring fingers.
I want to look at another print that you found. So I'll draw your attention to L10. Did you have an opportunity to analyze L10?
Yes.
And can you tell the jurors how you analyzed it?
L10, I determined to be 3 separate fingerprint impressions. These fingerprint impressions, I decided that they were not simultaneous because of the angle of deposition and the almost impossibility of deposition simultaneously due to anatomical position of the fingers on the hand and the directionality that these were deposited in. So these were all designated separately, L10A, B, and C, and they're all horseshoed at the top to show that they're identifiable fingerprint impressions.
Okay, and the image that you just pointed out that has horseshoes at the top to show that they're identifiable, that image, you did those horseshoes at the top, is that correct?
Yes, I
As
did.
part of your analysis?
Yes, the analysis images with any markings on them, I generate those at the laboratory as part of my analysis.
And here we're referring to States Exhibit 123. Did you have an opportunity to compare those items to any known prints?
Yes, I did.
And whose known prints did you compare them to?
I compared these to Adam Montgomery.
And I want to go through each in turn. So let's start with L10A, and I'm showing you States Exhibit 124. What does this show us?
This is my comparison chart, the latent being on the left side, the known being on the right. This is my comparison of L10A to Adam Montgomery's left middle finger.
And Mr. Orlowitz, what was the result of your comparison of L10A?
This was an identification to Adam Montgomery.
Do you know which finger of Adam Montgomery's?
The left middle.
I'm showing you what's been published as States Exhibit 125. What does this image show us?
This is L10B, again, a comparison chart of the latent on the left, the known on the right, showing my identification conclusion.
Who did you compare L10B to?
I compared it to Adam Montgomery.
And what were the results of that comparison?
I identified L10B to the left index finger of Adam Montgomery.
I want to turn to States Exhibit 126. What does this image show us?
This is my comparison chart for L10C, latent on the left, known on the right. This shows my identification conclusion for that impression.
And what was your conclusion for that impression?
I identified L10C to Adam Montgomery's left little finger.
I want to look at another print you found. Turn your attention to L11, and here I'm looking at States Exhibit 127. What is this image showing us?
This is one of my processing images from processing the item of evidence MER 3A that this latent L11 came from. This is just showing the latent in its entirety.
And how did you process this latent?
This latent itself, are you referring to the chemical processing or?
The chemical processing.
Chemical processing. This latent itself went through a process, well, this item itself, I'll say, went through a process called lumiscyanofuming. So it's a superglue fume that when heated up will polymerize on top of friction ridge detail present on an exhibit, present on an item. And it will leave a white residue, very light white residue on top of the ridges. This helps preserve them. It also helps make them more visible. Lumicyano also combines a fluorescent dye. So it can then later be visualized with an ALS, which I mentioned earlier, to help better visualize any prints present on that exhibit.
I'm going to move to States Exhibit 128. What does States Exhibit 128 show us?
This is my analysis image of that latent L11.
After analyzing L11, did you have an opportunity to compare it to any known prints?
Yes, I did.
And I'm turning to States Exhibit 129. What does States Exhibit 129 show us, Mr. Orlowitz?
This is my comparison chart of L11. L11 was analyzed to be a palm print, not a fingerprint. So this is my comparison chart of L11 to Adam Montgomery's left palm.
What were the results of your comparison, Mr. Orlowitz?
I reached an identification conclusion for this.
And who did you identify as the person that deposited that palm print?
Adam Montgomery.
And I'm sorry if I missed this, but which palm print was it of Adam Montgomery?
The left palm.
You could really see it in that print.
Mr. Orlowitz, I want to look at another print that you found, and I want to turn your attention to L13. This is States Exhibit 130. What does this image show us?
This is L13. This latent was also present on MER 3A. This is another processing image from that exhibit, from that evidence.
Did you have an opportunity to analyze this?
Yes, I did.
And how did you go about analyzing it?
My analysis for this, I determined that this was a latent fingerprint impression in the opposite orientation from what you see in this photo.
I'm turning to States Exhibit 131. What are we looking at here?
This is my analysis image of latent L13. The horseshoe for this latent is near the bottom of the image. So this is telling me that I believe this is an identifiable fingerprint impression, but also showing that my theoretical directionality of up for this would be this way, actually, so that the finger, if you can imagine my finger on the screen, it would be in this orientation.
Did you conduct a comparison of L13?
Yes, I did.
And who did you compare that item to?
Adam Montgomery.
And I'm turning to States Exhibit 132. What is this image showing us?
This is my comparison chart of L13. So latent on the left, known on the right. This shows my identification conclusion to the right index finger of Adam Montgomery.
I want to look at the final print that you found. So I want to turn your attention to L6, and this is States Exhibit 133. Did you have an opportunity to process States Exhibit 1 sorry, State's Exhibit 133, so L6.
Yes, I did.
And how did you go about doing that?
The exhibit that L6 was on was MER 3D. This evidence was a large piece of drywall with metal framing on it. It was roughly 5 foot by 6 foot. It measured about that. I did a super glue fume, so similar to the Lumicyano fume that I told you about earlier, but without the addition of the fluorescent dye step. So this was just with the super glue fume in order to process for these impressions.
Were you able to analyze this item?
Yes.
And I turn your attention to State's Exhibit 134, which I've put up on the screen. What does that show us?
This is my analysis image of latent L6. So I determined that these 4 touches, these 4 areas of friction ridge skin on this exhibit were one simultaneous impression. So all 4 of those fingers came down at the same time on the exhibit and left those 4 impressions.
Following your analysis, did you conduct a comparison of L6?
Yes, I did.
And who did you compare L6 to?
I compared to Adam Montgomery and Kayla Montgomery.
And what were the results of that comparison?
Both of them were excluded as having been the source of this impression.
And did you conduct further comparisons on this L6?
After reaching those exclusion conclusions, I ran this impression through our automated biometric identification system, or ABIS system, which is a repository of record impressions from local systems as well as national systems.
So I turn your attention to State's Exhibit 135. What does this image show us?
This is my comparison chart of L6 to known impressions of an individual who was a candidate on the search list that ABIS sent back to me after performing the search against the records. This candidate's name was Yared Luyano Mondrag. I identified this impression as having originated from that source.
So after looking at the entire ceiling paneling, the vents, there were only 2 individuals you were able to identify as having deposited prints on those items. Is that correct?
Yes.
And can you remind the jurors who those 2 individuals are?
Adam Montgomery and Yared Luyano Mondrag.
Are you aware that Yared Mondrag, Mr. Mondrag, was the drywall installer?
I was not aware of that.
Thank you. No additional questions.
I think they're deciding whether to break for the day before cross-examination starts because the judge knows how Bootleg Elaine asks the same question over and over, and she's going to try to really pick apart this evidence because honestly,
Thank you, Your Honor.
it's damning.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
They're moving forward.
A couple of questions. One about the fingerprints that you just testified about identifying in a comparison to a person.
Yes.
Okay. You got a high degree of certainty that you've identified the right people, right?
Yes.
And for especially in some of those fingerprints that had that level 3.
I don't recall specifically using level 3 in any of my comparisons. They were also done in June 2022, so my memory may be a bit off.
In any event, a very, very high degree of certainty that Adam Montgomery's fingerprints were found on the metal ceiling vent, and then some on the metal that held the drywall together.
Yes.
Right? And then the other was somebody completely unrelated.
Yes.
Okay, so let's go back to the cooler. When you analyzed the cooler, did something happen while you were analyzing before you started your analysis of the cooler? Did somebody come in and do something in front of you?
Kevin McMahon, who was a serologist at the laboratory, performed a serology examination on the cooler.
Okay, and this cooler, right now it's pretty dirty, right?
Yes.
And it's dirty because of the tools that you use to look for ridge detail, right?
Yes, I believe that's a portion of the residue that's left on that is from my processing.
Okay, so the reason that you would want somebody like Kevin McMahon to come in and do serology is that you might actually be changing the condition of the cooler.
Yes, there's the potential that any processing I do could dilute or remove biological evidence that's present on an exhibit. So in the laboratory in general, and specifically for this case, serology would be conducted prior to latent print processing.
And the reason, well, and again, you do this so that if there's evidence on this cooler, it can be found, whether
Yes.
serology or fingerprint.
Yes.
The other is that you talked about different surfaces being good for fingerprints.
Yes.
Is this cooler? And I can bring it to you. I can put a glove on and bring it to you if you'd like.
That's okay.
Okay. Is this cooler good for that sort of finding rich detail and stuff?
The exterior of the cooler is textured, which is not the best type of substrate or surface to retain fingerprint detail. Like I said before, smooth surfaces are usually what's best.
Okay. So I can go and I can touch this cooler at the top and you may not be able to find my ridge detail.
That's correct.
Okay. How about the handle? So same thing? It's metalish.
There may be a potential to find friction ridge detail on something like that handle. It's smooth, but it being a handle gets handled a lot, which could potentially wipe off any friction ridge detail that was deposited prior.
Okay. And that was going to be my next question. An object that is touched a lot might remove, smear, or change any ridge detail below it, right?
Yes, it may remove it completely.
And so you get an accumulation at some point and you may not even be able to identify the last person touching.
That's correct.
The metal ceiling vent and the drywall, did that go through a similar serology analysis before your fingerprint analysis?
Yes, they did.
And that was separate. It wasn't actually in your portion of the lab, right?
Right, that's correct.
Okay. And there's another item that you tested. Do you recall?
There was a small pink child's cup. I believe the item number was BEO 25.
Okay. And nothing there?
No friction ridge detail was documented or developed on that.
Okay. And was that a good surface to find fingerprints?
My recollection was that the exterior of the cup was fairly textured. There were some flat portions, but much of that cup, I think, was a textured surface.
Okay. So is it fair to say that none of the items that you tested raised a suspicion that they had been wiped or cleaned off?
No, I did not have that suspicion during my testing.
Thank you. Thank you.
Mr. Orlowitz, I just want to follow up on that last point. How would you know? How would you be able to see if things were wiped off?
During my processing, if wipe marks or drag marks became visible during the processing, that could potentially cue me off that something had at least been wiped across the surface.
and that wasn't present on the items that you analyzed.
I did not observe that.
With respect to the highly textured surfaces that you mentioned, how would you see those white marks in a highly textured surface like the cup that you mentioned or the cooler there?
It would be very difficult to see if any white marks were present on a textured surface.
No additional questions.
But it's fair to say that you saw nothing to raise that suspicion.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
All right, you may sit down. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we've reached the end of our day today. I remind you, don't discuss the case with anybody, not with each other or with anybody else. Don't watch any social media, read any newspapers, look at any online coverage of this case. Avert your eyes. So we'll begin again tomorrow morning. Please be here at 8:45 for a 9 a.m. start. Don't do any independent research. Thank you so much for your significant attention today. Have a good evening, ladies and gentlemen. All rise for the jurors, please.
And Sparkles, I laughed out loud when I saw it when you were like, "Oh, thank fuck." I could just hear that in people's heads. Oh, everybody's heads. Oh, thank fuck. So, in my estimation, that was pretty damning testimony against Adam.
All right, everybody. We'll see you in the morning. I don't know if we have somebody who's incarcerated who's coming. You're going to let me know before I say your next witness.
Yes, of course you are.
Okay.
I think there's just the one individual transport tomorrow.
Yeah.
We have the order of the day. We have 2 of the witnesses planned for today. We need to go back and figure out that order.
Okay. Okay.
Make sure that that person gets on and off tomorrow. So
Okay. Oh, you can all be seated. Just one last observation.
Let's see what they're
It
saying.
seems that there are some things that are being marked that either you may have had marked subsequent to the original marking for identification that hadn't been shown to the defense. Maybe I'm misreading that. I'm just seeing you bringing things over that are, new to the list. I just want to make sure. Are you seeing other than that fingerprint issue? Are you seeing everything in advance?
I think that there were some things that were marked this morning that we hadn't realized.
So I just want to say, if you know you're going to be using something and you're having our court monitor mark it, make sure that they see it. Okay, I think that's important. Just then they're not seeing it for the first time when it's being introduced. Okay, anything else? No. Very good. Thank you, everybody. I'll see you tomorrow.
Maybe that was the issue this morning that they're talking about, is that the court monitor was not, that they hadn't seen it. They hadn't seen it yet before it was presented.
Okay. I was thinking you said Scott.
And that was the issue that was caused this morning with the labeling of evidence. So it doesn't sound like it's going to be an issue or something they can go back on. So the order of these cases is, what happens is there's opening statements that each side gives, and then the prosecution, which has the burden, puts on their case. So the prosecution currently is putting on their case, and they will go through all of their witnesses. And yes, please don't forget to hit the thumbs up. Thank you very much. Consider becoming a member if you haven't already. Or if you haven't been gifted a nice membership by one of my lovely members, like Rebellious Rose and Cutie Pie. Where was I? Sorry. La 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 la. So right. So the order of court is then after the, I'm going to remove this. After the prosecution puts on their case, then the defense puts on their defense. And that's when they bring up all of their witnesses. And and that's when we will hear whatever witnesses they put forward. Now, what I heard them talk about was how the prosecution today said that they had planned to put 2 more witnesses on today that they're going to have to reschedule for tomorrow. And they also talked about how there's a witness that's supposed to come on tomorrow that's incarcerated. Now, I know that the defense has a witness on their list that's incarcerated, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're already moving to the defense's case. It just means they either had that person scheduled for tomorrow thinking that they'd be at that point, or there's another incarcerated person, prisoner on the prosecution on the state list. So yeah, it could be interesting. Tomorrow may be less dry to walk through, less dry. But like the prosecution hasn't put on their full case yet, but that testimony that we just heard was pretty damning. Adam's fingerprints and palm prints were all over where Harmony's body was stored, where they were. Kayla says that's where her body was stored. There's all kinds of testimony and evidence to say that was decomposition fluid that was in the ceiling. Yes, absolutely. Just me everything. Thank you. So it was definitely decomposition fluid. That was in the ceiling. Sorry, one moment. I'm trying to grab. Here we go. Sorry, I'm just grabbing this link. So, the fact that that's where, and there was a Kayla print somewhere in there as well, which was really interesting to me. Why would her prints be near where the, near where Adams were, where this decomposition fluid is, where she is testifying that that's where she was stored, right? And so the defense might jump on that and say, hey, look, Kayla's prints were there too. She's just as involved, or she's more involved than she has said she was. I don't know, it's above my pay grade and my education level to understand how that might affect Kayla later if they are found, if that means that it shows that she was more involved than she has stipulated to. So just it should be really interesting. I was checking out Twitter and I noticed this poll that Court TV put up. Check out this poll. It was just done 2 hours ago, and this is before the palm print specialist. I don't know. It's not. I don't think it's really that hard to. Oh, welcome, Just Me Everything. I really do believe that we are heading toward a guilty plea. That's such a. I mean, of course, Court TV. You can't go by the Court TV poll, right? But polls are indicators of where a jury might be in their, in their thinking, right? So it's just interesting. All right, so I have some special court clips for, the gifted memberships and the new members. Doesn't surprise me either, Lollipop. Oh yeah, you guys might be right that she testified to having to, so it might not show that she was more involved than she says she was. Yeah, it is gross, isn't it, Christina? So I have some special court clips. Some, if you were here this morning, you saw these, but they're so funny. This is so funny.
Mr. Ponton, I believe you have a filter turned on in the video settings. You might want to take
we're
a look.
trying to, can you hear me, Judge?
I can hear you. I think it's a filter.
It is, and I don't know how to remove it. I've got my assistant here. She's trying to, but I'm prepared to go forward with it. I'm here live. I'm not a cat.
I'm here live. I'm not a cat. I agree with you, Stephanie. There should be more charges for her. Let's see. Where's this one? This one cracks me up.
Judge, you're so gorgeous, Miss Judge. I just have to tell you, you're gorgeous. Thank you, Mr. Lewis.
So as that guy, look at the look on everybody else's face on the Zoom when he does that. Look at their faces. Hold on.
Judge, you're so gorgeous, Miss Judge. I just have to tell you, you're gorgeous. Thank you, Mr. Lewis.
They're like, what the hell? If that's the only way you can find a girlfriend is picking up on a beautiful judge, whatever. Miss Judge. You're beautiful. Oh, man. And just remember, there are beautiful places in the world like this. Like this. And of course, we cannot forget this beautiful little girl. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful little girl who had her whole life ahead of her. So I want to thank you all. Yeah, please go lightly on me. You're beautiful. Anyway, I want to thank you all once again for being here, for being so respectful, for all of your kind gift memberships, for joining, for hitting that thumbs up, for your intelligent and thoughtful conversation, for the information that you bring me when sometimes I'm failing with the information. I really, really do appreciate that. And I will set another live for tomorrow, and it sounds like we may get an incarcerated inmate. And I'm glad you all found me as well. So thanks again, and I will see you for the next Disorder in the Court. Bye-bye.